Lately, I found myself playing through older games. With this newer slew of games not really impressing me, I find myself repurchasing or playing through older titles that occupied too many hours of my childhood. Dragon Quest IX, Blue Dragon, Mass Effect 1, or Portal 1 and 2, all of these games I come back to enjoy immensely, despite them being released over a decade ago, and in some cases, showing their age. The 6th generation of gaming consoles was possibly one of the highlights in all of gaming, housing some of the most influential titles to ever hit shelves, along with breaking the gaming scene with the PlayStation 2, the highest selling console of all time. There are far too many games that define their genres during this period. Grand Theft Auto 3 made Rockstar one of the biggest gaming giants seemingly overnight. Bungie revolutionized the FPS genre and is still arguably the reason why Microsoft is in the business today. Nintendo and their GameCube hold many fond memories to gamers with The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Mario Sunshine, and Super Smash Bros. Melee. And staying in the background, hidden from the gaming public, was Beyond Good and Evil, published by Ubisoft in 2003. A cult classic among the general gaming public, and for a long time, I considered it to be among the best games of the 6th generation of consoles. Considered by many to be a near masterpiece of storytelling, with its complex messages about media and journalism, as well as having one of the greatest female protagonists ever in video games. The world itself is a highlight among so many, as is its gameplay. To some people, Beyond Good and Evil is considered Ubisoft's masterpiece, the best game that they've made. While one could easily argue for it being amazing during the 6th generation, has it aged as well as others, and is it deserving of all the praise it's gotten over its 17 years of existence? Well, let's find out. Ubisoft has been a part of the gaming world for over 30 years, and in their time, they made some rather weird games. Whether it was their more experimental titles such as Red Steel 2 or Watch Dogs, or their more mainstream titles nowadays like the Tom Clancy series, Far Cry, and of course Assassin's Creed, Ubisoft has always been one to make some rather special games in the eyes of the people. Special would become the word that enraptured Ubisoft Montpellier's 2003 project. At the turn of the millennium, Ubisoft's own Michel Ancel had enough of his Rayman series after working on the franchise for 5 to 6 years and decided to take the time to start a new series of games, something he would believe to blow people away, something that would be a new staple for the genre of adventure games. Ubisoft Montpellier's team began production on Beyond Good and Evil, which was known as Project BG&E at the time, after Rayman 2: The Great Escape had finished development. The team was small, and most of the developers from Rayman 2 returned to Michel's team to continue working for him. As such, the dev team were very tightly knit together from their previous experiences from working together. Initially, Michel envisioned an entire universe of worlds to explore, and to be packed onto a single disc. He wanted the player to feel like some kind of adventurer, going to different planets and having the freedom to do anything they wanted to do, similar to how Mass Effect 1 was originally going to be. Initially, the team couldn't pack these larger levels and worlds onto the Open Space engine, the engine used to make Rayman 2. So instead, Michel and his team went about building an entirely new game engine to make use specifically of the PlayStation 2's hardware, as it was the only console available at the time, and as a result, the Jade engine was created. The Jade engine was perfect for the type of game they were creating. Not only was it powerful for its time, but it was efficient as well. Thanks to this engine, the developers were able to have a very good workflow during production. What makes these techniques useful is that the developers, if they need to, can simply stop the game, make edits in the game itself, like remove a background or change it, or animate a movement or animal, then unpause it, without needing to reload any assets, which usually requires developers to exit out of the engine they were using and reopen it. However, even with the strides the team made with their engine, technical limitations resulted in the universe being largely dumbed down, and also caused a large amount of cuts to the story as well, which I was unfortunately unable to find any specifics on. And things only got more difficult for them. Over the course of the 4-year period, over half of the team moved off of Project BG&E due to believing that the game was too complex to make, and that they weren't used to making games that told big-budget stories with powerful messages to tell the player. Thankfully, not everyone lost faith. As the project was still ongoing, it even caught the attention of Ubisoft founder and CEO Yves Guillemot, who ended up becoming the project producer of BG&E. The CEO of the mega publisher understood and realized Montpellier's potential due to their previous success with Rayman 2. He was willing to give the team a lot of freedom with the project, and was willing to give them time to complete the game they wanted to make rather than rushing it out the door unfinished. Interesting. As mentioned earlier, the story as well went through many changes. The team always wanted to tell an ambitious tale, but they wanted to tell one that had meaning and a message behind it all, rather than just, evil guy is evil, go deal with them, and save the world. Due to the complicated nature of the game, as well as the changes to the world, gameplay, and characters, the script was rewritten several times, and unfortunately I cannot give an exact number of times, as the details were vague. I had difficulty even finding this information as a whole. But this wasn't what happened. During development, the September 11th terrorist attacks occurred. Hence, Ubisoft Montpellier had a change of direction. Now they desired to tell a story with a darker premise, and with much more mature themes than before. This paradigm shift resulted in the game's themes about propaganda, media corruption, and government conspiracies. All of these tie back to Jade's motivation as a character, which will be discussed. Thankfully, on BeyondGood&Evil's official wiki, there was a leaked script that was translated from French that is actually very similar to the final product, but it has some key differences, like having a whole new faction of people called the Naz, and I'm very sorry if I mispronounced that, who supply Hillis with energy and resources, having other upgrades for the hovercraft aside from the ones that are already in the game. The Neutrophils factory has a much bigger impact on the story during the early floors before Paige is taken. Paige's twist is revealed much earlier in the story as well. The Alpha sections spin the tables and actually make Jade and Double H look like terrorists, and there was even apparently going to be some kind of gathering with world leaders. It's a rather fascinating read, which will be linked in the description. Jade herself is an interesting topic when it comes to discussing BG&E's development. During production, the team was having difficulty simply moving things along, and Michel noticed this. He called a meeting and realized that he had to explain to the team what he wanted Jade to be like, which was making her look and feel primarily female, rather than being a woman with masculine traits. Supposedly this made things difficult, but thanks to some women who were on the development team, they were frequently responsible for checking over things that fit Jade as a character, since the team would ask them constantly if the things they were making would fall in line with what Michel wanted. Even things like Jade's name was different. Originally, Jade's name was Sally, as found in the game files, and her code name was Jade. But this was changed because it wasn't popular among the team, so they scrapped it, and made her real name Jade. And it was during development that the team decided on Shawnee as her codename, due to how exotic it sounds when it's said. The name of the game, BeyondGood&Evil, is believed to be a reference to the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and I am very sorry once again if I mispronounced that, who wrote a book with the same name. However, while I am no expert in philosophy, I and many others have found no connection between the book and the game's themes. As it turns out, Between Good and Evil was the original title. However, the marketing team changed it for reasons that I'll get into in the story section. Beyond Good and Evil was shown to the public at E3 2002, where the response wasn't too kind. Nothing was noteworthy at the conference, although supposedly, Ubisoft showed the game to Shigeru Miyamoto and the late president Satoru Iwata, may he rest in peace, but they didn't like it. The only thing that they did like was how Paige would help the player if they were in a bind. If an enemy was pinning Jade to the ground, Paige would run by and help you by knocking the enemy away, which was a feature that stayed in the final release. The E3 2002 build also had different changes, such as the Beluga being accessible almost immediately, since the upgrade parts were in the waters of Hillis. Along with this, Jade hadn't been given her Daijo staff, and was using melee combat and some supply of magic for encounters. And the one that was most interesting and cool to me personally, having a total of about 4 to 5 sidekicks in the field at all times with Jade, so they could patrol in a bit of a squad or something like that. But this was eventually cut, most likely due to technical limitations. The next E3 appearance was the following year, and upon getting feedback, Jade's appearance was changed. Michelle Ansel's reasoning was because Jade's initial design didn't fit with what Michelle had been telling people. Jade was an independent woman and a reporter, yet looked like a teenager with some hideous-looking cowpants. There was tons of love and effort put into Beyond Good and Evil, with its development cycle demonstrating Michelle Ansel and his team's creative and ambitious minds. And ultimately, through all the game's changes, after 4 years of development, through the thick, thin, world-shattering events and alterations to its staff, Beyond Good and Evil was finally completed and released in November of 2003, and to very little fanfare from the world. Beyond Good and Evil can be broken up into 3 main types of gameplay, excluding its minigames: combat, exploration, either on foot, your hovercraft, or later on, your spaceship, or stealth. I feel like I should start with combat, as BG&E's combat system initially seems to have some depth behind it, and is probably one of the things that keeps players initially hooked. The combat in Beyond Good and Evil is rather nice on the surface, feeling smooth and responsive during your first few encounters with enemies. As you quickly learn the controls and figure out what button is for dodging and sidestepping, you'll soon figure out a pattern to battles that you'll stick to throughout the game. Pressing a key or rotating the thumbstick in a direction aside from forward and pressing the attack button will have Jade do some sort of acrobatic maneuver to not only make combat look flashy, but also be used in an aggressive manner. Soon enough, you'll be able to figure out an even deeper part of the combat system, where if you sidestep and press a key different than the direction that you're in, you'll be able to easily pull off backflips and side hits with little problem. This makes the combat, once you get used to it, very smooth. Along with this, Jade has a super combo, which is a guaranteed kill against any enemy that is hit by it. If one times out their attacks, it can be performed at will and used in any encounter, making your time in combat much more effective. Upon my second playthrough, I started to experiment with things, and I believe that Beyond Good and Evil grants the player invincibility frames when dodging. This can be used to your benefit after fighting Alpha Sections members, and once you figure this out, one can easily exploit this and make sure that Jade doesn't take any damage for the rest of the game. As a kid, when playing this game, I believed that the combat was a precursor to the Arkham series' free-flow combat, as nearly all of your movements could be chained together in both games. And having all this mobility with you throughout the game from the get-go is liberating. Going through the game without taking most hits on a majority of the threats is cathartic. It makes Jade feel more like a badass than a reporter. Something else that is good about the combat is the variety of levels. Black Isle is a combination of calm exploration in the environment, and an introduction to some of the normal enemies you'll face throughout the game. The Neutrophils Factory introduces stealth as well as showing you the importance of timing not just your attacks, but also your dodges against the Alpha Sections. The Slaughterhouse has you beginning to learn how especially effective the Gyrodisc is, as well as teammate actions in unison with your inputs. The Moon does the same when it comes to combat, since by the time you get to the Neutrophils Factory, all of the mechanics are given to you. But still, it all prepares you throughout the campaign. Something else that I noticed about BG&E's campaign is how it has the same thing that Half-Life 2 does. Each level is so memorable in some way that you remember it long after you completed it. Half-Life 2 players remember Ravenholm so much because of how it only lasts for one chapter, and that area isn't repeated after completion. The same is said here. Black Isle, the Neutrophils Factory, the Slaughterhouse, and the Moon are all experiences that are ingrained into your memory after completing the game, and upon playing the game years later, you remember almost everything about each area. What prevents this combat system from being great is a wide variety of issues. The simple fact that you don't get any new abilities that change the combat throughout the game is a big one personally. The only 2 things that come close to having an upgrade are the super attack upgrade from Mingzu's shop in the pedestrian district, and the Gyrodisc launcher, though that last example is stretching it a little bit. There's also the partner actions, which are usually used for puzzle solving during stealth sections, along with the aforementioned Gyrodisc launcher. All the abilities just mentioned can be applied to combat with varying degrees of success. For example, partner actions are just simple moves that your companions use when you press a key. However, this makes them extremely useful when they are available. Against Alpha Sections members, you can use the partner action, and the enemy will either be stunned, allowing you to get in a free combo, potentially killing the enemy, or if you line things up perfectly, instantly kill them. It's essentially a win button no matter how you look at things. The gyro disc launcher is a complete waste of space when in combat situations, since you'll have to open your camera, often at a disorienting point of view, then click the right mouse button to fire at it. But in almost any situation, excluding some bosses where you have to use it, you don't want to use it as it puts you at a disadvantage. Jade's super attack with the Daijo is basically an AoE attack that can either highly damage enemies or take out a squad of smaller mobs. But even with the upgrade, which adds little missile-like projectiles that shoot out of Jade when activated, you still really don't need to use it, since using normal attacks with acrobatics is just as effective. I suppose this comes with the territory, but the normal option of attacking with Jade's enhanced mobility is just overall a superior option, especially as most of the projectiles from the super attack don't even hit enemies. Another issue that Ubisoft didn't seem to be aware of is the game's balance. In most fights against early game mods, you don't need to worry about dying, since not only can you stock up on healing items, you can also stock up on the amount of PA1s you have, especially if you've been keeping up on exploration and taking pictures of animals. Since most enemies deal 1 heart of damage to you, all you need to do is stockpile on PA1s, which aren't hard to find, and give them all to Jade, and you will literally never die. Fighting any enemy is a joke, as you will have more than enough hearts to survive the encounter if you're hit multiple times, and even if you get close to death, finding healing items is also in abundance, trivializing the difficulty as a whole. The only way to make the game difficult this way is to purposely not find them or give them to your companions, but that's not a solution. The previously mentioned partner actions make certain fights way too easy. Fights against the transport unit XBs, or eggs, and earlier on the Polarinuses, jellyfish, and barnacles are far too easy, since all you need to do is spam your companion's ability and hit them across the map, or out of sight, and not worry about them. This eliminates any form of challenge across the game. The only challenge comes from the Alpha Section soldiers and the bosses. The Alpha Section soldiers are not only difficult because of their higher health pool and increased damage, as they hit Jade for 2 hearts instead of 1, the challenge in their encounters also depends on where you are in fighting them. Many arenas, especially in the Neutrophils Factory and the Slaughterhouse, are incredibly cramped, mainly because each level is built in a linear path. The developers didn't intend for many secret areas in the main dungeons of the game. The only reward for going out of your way is either a health upgrade, a few items, or on occasion, a pearl or a new animal to photograph. And due to the cramped nature of these arenas, you'll often be forced to either take damage, get lucky with dodging an enemy strike, or run away from the enemies, forcing them to go back to their posts so you can try again. It's not a smooth system to deal with when you're constantly being interrupted like this. Then there's the bosses, but they aren't much better. There are technically 7 bosses throughout the game, but there are really only 4, and none of them have any kind of real complexity minus the final boss. The first combat section finishes up with the fight against the Dom's lighthouse monster, and, well, it's easily cheesable. All you need to do is use your super attack once its bone shield comes up and wail on it. After that, repeat that pattern and you're done. The first real boss, the Parolamax, is a good start. It has unique abilities that are exclusive to the rest of the enemies in the area, it spawns extra mobs for you to deal with, shoots out projectiles, and has multiple holes for it to come out of, so it's never predictable. And you can't simply wail on the boss like in other action-adventure games. You need to use your partner action to stun it so you can get in a few hits before it leaves. It's a good introduction for the bosses, and it utilizes all the mechanics you've learned up until that point, making it a highlight, even if it ends pretty prematurely. The second real boss, the Reaper, is another interesting fight. The Reaper prematurely captures Paige, so you're on your own during the encounter. You're only able to get a few hits in before it jumps away, and afterwards you'll need to hit it with your new Gyrodisc launcher for it to come down. After this, you need to have it shield its eyes by hitting it with a Gyrodisc again, then you can go in and hit it a couple times. While the arena you fight it in is limited, it does make use of your new equipment, which is a nice theme throughout the game and the bosses. The next boss, the Dom's Robot, is pretty much a rehash of the Parolamax fight, where you need to stun your enemy with your ally's path action, along with knocking it over, and using your Gyrodisc launcher to hit its weak point in the center. It's a rather easy boss since you've done a fight like this before, and since it doesn't really do anything new with it, it doesn't score any points for me, making it the weakest boss so far. General Keck's flying ship acts as a bit of a puzzle boss. You need to shoot out its flashing lights while avoiding the lasers and mines he throws at you. However, it's far too easy to maneuver around all of these obstacles, making it one of the easier bosses in the game. The final boss, the Dom's Priest, is far and away the most difficult boss in the entire game, and for multiple reasons. Firstly, the fight is in layers: the combat, and then the puzzle elements. For combat, the early parts of the fight have enemies spawning mobs at you. These Doms go down in one hit, which is great from both a gameplay and story perspective. Gameplay-wise, it fits with how Jade has become more powerful, not just with the abilities hidden away inside of her, but also over the course of the adventure. She's had to get into combat encounters with all kinds of enemies, furthering her experience. Story-wise, this will be discussed in that section, but let's just say it fits into the Dom Priest's words for now. The puzzle elements come into play when you need to use not just your Gyrodisc launcher, but also your partner's action in order to hurt the boss and start the next few phases. Then there's the precise input section where if you mess up, you'll be forced to restart that section over again and lose a bit of health. All sections of this boss make up to be the most complex situation you've encountered up until this point, and gameplay-wise, ends it on a high note. But we're still not done, as one of the final points I want to make is on the AI of both your companions and foes. During development, supposedly Michelle wanted the AI to react carefully in coordination with the player, have the AI jump off ledges at the right time after the player instead of getting them stuck in the environment or in a doorway. During exploration, I didn't have a single issue with this, so hats off to them there. But the real meat and potatoes is with the AI during battle. Paige and Double H, no matter what combat situation you're in, will do anything from hit an enemy once every 2 minutes, to stand out in the open, not doing anything, and just getting pounced on by Crochaxes. They don't help at all, and it's only when you manually input them to do something that they're actually useful in your quest. It makes the Last Guardian's Trico AI look like the enemies in F.E.A.R. And of course, I can't discuss Beyond Good and Evil without mentioning the controls, camera, and the PC port. Beyond Good and Evil on PC has many quirks, and unlike the camera mechanic, this doesn't enhance the experience. The controls on PC are very unintuitive, requiring me to go into the game files and manually adjust my keybinds there. I'm not even able to adjust the keys in the game itself, and even then I couldn't find a control system that really responded with me. Oftentimes I would go to sprint and I found myself clicking the key that was my camera button instead. Moving around, especially with the various camera angles, doesn't help the game's case either, since whenever the camera changes to a fixed angle, Jade will then move into a direction that I don't want her to, which makes it frustrating. Or, my favorite example, the game will often think I pressed a key I didn't at all, or input a command that I didn't want. This most often happened when I was getting on and off the hovercraft, and sometimes I would be coming in and out of it multiple times before being able to move again. And finally, there's the camera itself. Anyone who's played BG&E knows that there are two types of cameras in this game: fixed and free angles. The fixed angles are usually done in stealth sections or during some areas to invoke a cinematic style. While I can see the appeal of them and most of them hold up rather well, not all of them do, and the fixed camera angles that screw with your gameplay don't help matters. And when the camera is given to you, you're often forced to deal with it being far too close to Jade, limiting your vision as it is mostly focused on her character model. And when you get in certain situations, there are often times where the camera will spaz out and give you a mini seizure, not responding to you while driving around, or getting stuck on the environment or in a wall. Beyond Good and Evil's combat does have problems, but overall it's a blast. It's satisfying to backflip enemies to death, watch Jade fly around the arena with extreme agility, but it's minor issues like this that hold the game back from reaching its full potential in the combat department. If Ubisoft were to add features to combat that spiced up battles a bit more, then I would be far less harsh on it than I was, which all leads into our next segment, exploration. Exploration is another big aspect of Beyond Good and Evil's gameplay, but it's more important on the story side rather than the gameplay side. Exploration in BG&E mainly involves you floating around Hillis in your hovercraft, looking for animals to photograph and secret areas to find, usually with a gameplay reward. However, looking back on it, the areas themselves are more packed with fat rather than being a sprawling open world. Most areas that exist in Beyond Good and Evil only exist to give the player an extra pearl, some credits, and a couple animals to photograph, as I said previously. This is padding at its worst, and in the gameplay department doesn't make one excited to move around the world of Hillis. The amount of gameplay variation here, however, is lacking. It's not like how Mass Effect side missions had rewards in multiple sections, either gear, lore, or even character development. They either involve sneaking around the Alpha Section's mini-bases, racing, either against others or in the pursuit of another vehicle, or a mini-dungeon against animals of the world. Level design as a whole is intelligently done, as each dungeon in the game is well crafted in both environments, levels, and sections. As with the gameplay variation, it does get stale since either you're inside a cave or you're infiltrating a facility. And all the while, they mostly end up devolving into a linear line, excluding the slaughterhouse, but nonetheless, each level is a joy to play through. All of these events hold pearls to collect, and what makes them more tedious is when I feel Ubisoft could have made some of these side areas more memorable. Say for example, the Volcano Krochak's cave. The only way to get there is by obtaining the Beluga and flying into the Black Isle's volcano crater at the top. After that, it reuses assets from the other caves in the world, and you have to fight multiple waves of Krochaks, only for getting pearls. Since the citizens of the world were hyping this place up to be a huge treasure-filled area, I had hoped it had housed something more than just pearls and the same Krochaks enemies I had been fighting for the last 7 hours. Plus, it comes in really late in the game. By this point, you could finish it up in less than 2 hours, so I would have hoped that there was something here that would make it more worth my while. If Ubisoft were to maybe give this area a new enemy type, or have them house a new piece of equipment for Jade, Paige, or Double H, then this could have been an awesome area that I looked forward to in later playthroughs. But instead, it ended up being the same as all others, just another spot to look through, nothing interesting about it from a gameplay perspective. See, in games like Ratchet and Clank, the player is free to explore as much or as little as they'd like to. They are free to do whatever they want. If they want to go out and get a ton of weapons that trivializes the game, they can do that. Beyond doesn't do this. Jade is stuck with the same toolkit for the entire game. And while it's great that the developers give the player almost all their tools at the start, it's also a hindrance when said toolset is so limited. And things don't help when the hovercraft and the Beluga control like garbage. I have more issues with the hovercraft than the Beluga since you don't control the Beluga for that long, and you get it so late in the game it almost feels like an afterthought, ironically enough. The hovercraft's poor controls make sections in both the main quest and side areas difficult, particularly the looter caves, where you need to make precise turns executed perfectly to stay up to speed with the slowly closing doors. But due to the fact that the hovercraft turns far too wide and its poor handling when in enclosed spaces, it makes sections like the looters and the slaughterhouse particularly frustrating. Exploration is one of the weaker aspects of BG&E in my opinion, which is unfortunate. Though its world building is a great part of the game, in terms of gameplay it isn't too special. And while exploring both the dungeons and the side areas, you'll encounter the final segment of BG&E's gameplay: stealth. Stealth in BeyondGood&Evil usually works like this. You have a section dotted with obstacles and enemies to avoid. You need to memorize the guards' movement patterns and adapt accordingly, all the while making sure that you aren't caught, make any noise, stay in the shadows, and, if the need calls for it, hit the guards' oxygen masks so that they are incapacitated. They're simple mechanics, but they work. However, while the stealth sections have been done relatively well, there isn't anything in it that will make one get super excited. Mainly since these sections sometimes require little input from the player to succeed. Many areas are able to be stealthed through without the need for combat, and the extent of difficulty comes when you make it hard on yourself on purpose, causing 4 guards to come near you and play a game of whack-a-mole with your gyrodisc launcher, popping Alpha Section's air tanks as they come in predictable patterns. It seems their AI is focused on helping their fellow soldiers if they're in danger, so all you need to do is injure one of them, wait for them to think you're gone, come back when they've stopped searching for you, and hit them again. This predictable pattern is one that all players can and most likely will fall back on throughout the entire game, eliminating any semblance of challenge, except when the insta-kill lasers decide to activate when you are inevitably spotted, sometimes randomly and without any warning. Which might happen quite a lot when the environment gets in your way when using your gyrodisc launcher. Even if your body is out of the way of everything, the gyrodisc launcher will still get caught on things in the environment, often causing guards to turn around and look in your direction, either catching you or causing you to restart a section. Speaking of which, the guards are mostly stupid in how they walk around the environment, and they don't spot Jade unless you're directly in their line of sight. But even then, the game can sometimes flip a coin and see if the guards will catch you. Each aspect of gameplay has pros and cons, and all of them add up to being ultimately enjoyable despite their faults. It ultimately engages the player. However, the gameplay as a whole, despite being enjoyable, is too inconsistent in my eyes to warrant calling it great. But people don't play Beyond Good and Evil and hold it on a high pedestal because of its gameplay loop. It's because of its story, characters, themes, and world. Truth surrounds everything in Beyond Good and Evil. In the beginning, no one really knows what's going on, and it's up to Jade to figure out what is happening. From the opening cutscene, we are immediately given a hook in the form of a news report regarding the DOMS attacks and the Alpha sections. Over an intercom is General Keck, who is trying to recruit and reassure the Hylian people that everything will be alright, perfectly timed as the planet is being bombarded with DOMS meteors, already foreshadowing the narrative's themes to come. As Jade and one of the orphans are sitting on the cliff edge, they are immediately attacked by the DOMS. Upon the kids getting eager, Jade is now forced to fight for survival and save the children. Control is given to the player for the first time here, and even later into the fight, the screen pulses for a moment, and the gameplay shows a slow motion effect. This here is showing that each fight Jade is in, no matter how big or small, is about survival for her. She isn't fighting because she enjoys it, but because she has to do it in order to survive. Most games at the time didn't think about how the main character of their story would feel in situations like that, just how the player feels. That context makes this moment powerful as you immediately begin to realize that Jade is her own person, rather than being an avatar for the player. Upon wrapping up the boss fight, the Alpha sections are doing the exact opposite thing they are advertising they're doing. They arrive late to the scene of the incident, and the reporter doesn't seem any the wiser, which Paige calls them out on.
Well, you guys are not what I'd call as fast as a speeding bullet. Keep doing nothing. And next time, there'll be nothing left here to save.
Cut! Hey, Pop, stay zen. Don't get your snout bent out of shape. All right, boys, that's a wrap. Pack it up!
Try to keep these clips of Paige in mind. I'll be coming back to them later. After waking up, you can listen to the radio inside the lighthouse, and you realize that the clip of Paige's ranting was edited, leading to two possible explanations. The reporters are with the Alpha sections and are in on the secret, or they firmly believe that the Alpha sections represent all that is good on Hylis. Either way, both ideas further show how much power the media has over the populace.
Well, you guys are not what I'd call as fast as a speeding bullet. Keep doing nothing. And next time, there'll be nothing left here to save. Well, you guys are what I'd call as fast as a speeding bullet.
What makes this story so intriguing and engaging is that so much of it is shown rather than told, which is something that many games struggle to do. Most of the dialogue that Jade and her companions have are simply about her orders on what to do when on missions. Most of the context in world building, story, and character interaction is done through the environment, visuals, and small exchanges between the characters during cutscenes, and it's far more engaging, which leads to Jade's camera. Jade's camera is her main weapon. As stupid as this sounds, Jade's true weapon is the truth. She's a journalist, and using her camera, she captures the truth and gives it to the people of Hylis. And as the game goes on, you begin to realize how deep everything goes. The seeds are planted at the Black Isle mine, when you meet Han, or Mr. de Castelac's employer, at the time. He first tells you that there is a DOMS creature at the bottom of the mine, and would like a picture. At first you think you're just trying to get some money for the children so you can keep them safe, as that's Jade's main goal at the start of the game. She wasn't employed at the time, which explains why she has 0 credits in the bank. This also helps the player empathize with Jade, as her main goal in the beginning is something that every person can relate to, getting money. But it's quickly revealed that there is more to this plot than originally thought. Han lays all the cards on the table here, and when all is said and done, the seed that was planted begins to sprout, as Jade is intrigued by what the Iris Network is proposing.
If there's a way to stop this war, we can't let it pass us by.
During all of this, Jade is given access to the open world of Hylis, and this is where the game shines brighter than all the other parts combined. The world of Hylis, strictly speaking, is wonderfully crafted. The people in this world react differently to things throughout the game. Nearly everyone can be talked to and has their own speech impediment, motivations, goals, and problems. People's opinions change throughout the game, showing how your actions have affected the world. People start to protest against the alpha sections, as your pictures are shown in the Iris reports. As with those side areas that I mentioned earlier, you're not encouraged to check them out. You have to go to them, and see how far down the alpha section's operations have gone. It enhances the world as you are able to see and experience the world firsthand instead of being shown it in a cutscene or directed to it. Plus, something else I was rather shocked by was how many people in the beginning of the game actually reacted differently to the Iris Network's key phrase.
Safe and sound in its shell, the precious pearl is the slave of the currents.
Some react with fear for Jade's life. Some react with hostility. Some point Jade in the direction of the base, as it's implied that they're supporters of the Iris Network. And some don't even know what the phrase is, or even care what it is or what it means. It gives the residents of each part of Hillis their own personality and identity, as they don't all have to be involved in the grand narrative of the story. This world building reminds me a lot of Metro 2033, where you can clearly see how people are getting by in the post-apocalyptic world. From people selling clothes, food, and weapons, to beggars asking for money, farmers raising livestock, and children running around, the world itself is without a doubt Metro's highlight. While BG&E doesn't reach the height of the Metro series in this regard, it's pretty damn close to that, where it feels like nearly everything on Hillis is important, and is a reason why I think BeyondGood&Evil is as fondly remembered as it is. But you can't talk about memorable without discussing Jade as a character, who is one of the best examples of a female protagonist done correctly in all of media. Jade doesn't exhibit any of the stereotypes that exist in female characters, but in my eyes, is a balance of everything that can be seen as good in a protagonist in a game like this. Jade is strong-willed with the fighting spirit inside of her, both when it comes to hunting the truth and in combat because she needs to survive, but is also sensitive and caring like a mother is, which is clearly shown in how she took care of the orphans in the lighthouse. Jade isn't a damsel in any way. She has martial arts training with her bow staff, but isn't some badass who can miraculously get out of any situation she's in. The very first level showcases this with her getting captured by the Doms and having Paige come out of the window, landing on the Doms monster, and throwing Jade her staff to get her out of the cage, with Paige even saying,
Free yourself, Jade! I'll create a diversion!
Jade couldn't get out of that situation on her own. She needed Paige. She has many feminine characteristics, but isn't defined by them, and that's something that writers everywhere seem to be afraid of, especially nowadays, developing female characters as, well, a woman. It feels like you can't portray women in a nature that makes one think they only exist to be a woman. You need to portray them as just as capable as men, but that only needs to be shown when writing the character. Not any of their struggles, not any of their relationships, just how awesome that they can be, and how much better they are than men, and that they are just as good as others because they can do all those things because they are women! Ugh, God, I hate this kind of writing. Jade is one of the best female characters to ever grace this earth, because the writers and developers understood that Jade is a woman, yet isn't defined by those stereotypes. She can be a balance of all of these things, and it makes her engaging to play as well as engaging to watch. And the same can be said for Jade's companions, Paige and Double H. Paige is the adopted uncle of Jade, which is revealed in one of the M-discs you get while you're in the game. He's a bit of an engineer and comic relief character, which works well given the game's tone at the beginning. Despite the game being about propaganda, corruption, and human trafficking, the moments outside of this where this is happening, where the characters are just talking with each other, are very lighthearted and contribute to Jade and Paige's relationship.
No need to thank me. Your sunny smile is thanks enough.
Yeah, I'll give you a sunny smile.
Thanks, Jade. I'd have ended up on a silver platter with an apple in my mouth if it wasn't for you.
Shut up. You're making me hungry. I'm gonna regret saving you. I didn't realize your pliers came equipped with the club option.
Model D53, my little lady. Slices, dices, and pounds. me wear out my jet boots, Jade.
The latest style in transportation.
That's not all, Jade. That's not all.
Jade and Paige talk to each other like they're family, but there's also this sort of... how do I explain it? This friendship that they have. You know how there's always that one friend that you have where the two of you can just exchange jabs and poke fun at each other and the both of you can just shrug it off at the end of the day? It's kind of like that. Their banter is simple and short, but it's effective. Double H is an Iris network agent who you find in the Neutrophils factory, and plays an important role in helping Jade get off her feet. He's another comic relief character as shown in his introduction. Each character adds to the narrative rather than taking away from it, thanks to their lovable interaction with Jade. Even if I do think that, generally speaking, the writing is subpar without many outstanding moments, unlike, say, for instance, Mass Effect 1 with Saren, and how, generally speaking, Shepard and Saren's interactions are always very entertaining and interesting to listen to. Back to the story. During the Neutrophils factory, Paige hands Jade an M-Disc that he brushes off as something that just arrived for Jade a few days prior. Jade is immediately shocked, and Paige solemnly apologizes, almost a signal that something is going to happen soon. The player looks around a bit more, only to hear Paige screaming for his life, making both Jade and the player worried if they're invested in their relationship. As Jade is running back to help her uncle, we get a shift perspective of Jade and Paige as the little pig is being thrashed around by the Alpha Section soldiers. The cutscene moves in slow motion, just like the opening fight against the Doms. Jade is too late to save him, and you're right there with her, wishing that it didn't come to this. Now the matter was personal for Jade. Now she had to do this not just to get the truth, but also to rescue her uncle. Conveniently, the developers place an M-Disc reader right next to the door that the Alpha Section's locked, and upon going up to it, the player will most likely want to read Paige's M-Disc now that he was taken and you have a moment to collect yourself, to which you and Jade are both given hints to her origin and on what happened to her parents and why she was on Hylas. Upon watching it, Jade's motivations are set and firmly cemented into the journey now. As for if it had the same effect on the player, that's up to them.
Jade, you inherited generosity and courage from your parents. You know, I think about them a lot. We were very close friends. 20 years ago, we were forced to separate because we were all having some major problems with the authorities. Your parents put you under my care to save your life. We came to Hylas. Back then, it was a peaceful planet. I had hoped to raise you there safely. But the conflict spread. Now, you must know something. If I was able to get here, it was thanks to the Beluga, the spaceship that I designed and built with your father. It still exists, but I haven't exactly finished getting it back in top shape. You'll find the checkup report on my desk. The Beluga is at our place. You have to enter a code into each one of the consoles to open the secret hiding place. I can't say any more on this M-Disc about it, but I hope this information will be useful to you if, one day, you have to use the Beluga. No matter what happens, good luck, Jade. Uncle Paige.
Now, while this moment specifically is very effective at getting the player's attention, I do feel like there could have been another way of going about it. Maybe have an M-Disc reader before Paige was captured, and being required to read before you can progress could allow Jade and Paige to have an emotional conversation about things, Jade demanding answers and maybe even getting a little angry, and Paige explaining things to her in a cutscene. It could strengthen their relationship before crap hits the fan, and could give Jade a separate purpose aside from just Paige and the truth. After this, the game repeats itself in a pattern. You go to a dungeon, find Alpha Section's members there, solve some puzzles, take some photos, and get out. But after the slaughterhouse, you think you're on the right track when this happens.
That's my uncle, Paige!
Your uncle? Our chief?
Now for those people in the comments who are automatically going to call this twist out for coming out of left field, I disagree. There are plenty of moments in the game where Paige is subtly trying to tell Jade to back away from all of this.
You know this DeCastellat guy?
Huh? Can't go there, Jade. Smells like a trap. It's too dangerous.
Are you loco? We need some dinero to protect us from those kingdoms.
Don't you worry, Paige. Everything will be fine. If you want, I'll go alone.
No, it's just... Okay, we'll go together. But I'm sticking to you like bees on honey, whether you like it or not. Okay, we're gonna have to keep on our toes now, Jade.
Don't worry, Uncle Paige. We'll just take some pictures and get home.
It's getting too risky, Jade. We're needed back at the lighthouse. Let's stop while we still can.
If the Iris Network is telling the truth, then this is where we're needed most.
He's constantly trying to keep Jade safe, but with Jade's persistence on the truth, she presses on. And in dialogue with Paige, he's constantly annoyed or frustrated with the Alpha sections, not liking what they're doing and trying to hint that they aren't doing what they say they are. Whenever Jade goes into the Iris hideout, Paige doesn't enter because he doesn't want to be recognized. He stays on the ground floor of the Akuda bar. Even the Iris members admit to not knowing what their leader looks like. Though, again, this twist is somewhat foreshadowed while talking with Iris members and with other characters in the world. I will admit that there are some details that are overlooked, like how when Han takes both Paige and Jade back to the entrance of Black Isle, and Paige speaks in his normal voice, Han doesn't immediately recognize him as the leader. However, this is just one moment, and the rest of the game is consistent with this twist. Speaking of the cutscenes, this leads into something else Beyond has going for it: the music. Composed by Christophe Heral, in his first job as a composer for a video game, he decided to begin part of the soundtrack with a track titled Propaganda. He was inspired by this track when talking with a girlfriend over the phone about the media and propaganda, which is one of the major themes of this game. The soundtrack is one of BG&E's highlights, and completely enhances the experience. Ambient snare effectively sets the mood for how it feels to go through all of the Alpha section's bases. Peace is a solemn track that can make the player feel sadness and grief for Jade and the other characters. Fight is another track that enhances the experience when Jade is caught by the Alpha sections. Plus, hearing sirens go off while the track is playing also sells that Jade's in trouble, as if all of the Alpha section soldiers in the base are coming to her position. can't talk about BeyondGood&Evil's OST without giving some love to arguably its most popular song. It's certainly my favorite. The tracklist enhances every single scene that it's played in, and what's good is that not every single area has a piece of music to accompany it, making its power all the better when it's played. Akin to Half-Life 2, where the soundtrack only kicks in when it's needed to set the stakes, or when a moment is especially powerful. Upon hearing the news that Paige is still alive, Jade goes to fix the beluga. However, after failing to get the ship to fly, they go to the Mamago garage, and the lighthouse gets destroyed. This is Jade's lowest point. Her father figure is taken away to the moon. The children have just been kidnapped. Her home is now destroyed, and everything she ever loved is gone. And we are given to the most emotional scene in the game due to this event. Thankfully, Jade is quickly lifted off her feet and gets back to work with determination. But keep this monologue in mind for later. After getting the ship to work, Jade and Double H fly to the moon and are entering the final stages of dealing with the Alpha sections. Jade and Double H get to Paige, but after solving a puzzle to get him out, Paige dies. However, Paige isn't actually dead. In recent times, I've gone back and forth on this revelation, on how Paige is alive after Jade's spiritual energy is released. On the one hand, it does its best to explain the magical elements that Jade has locked away, while on the other, it feels like the writers couldn't get their balls together and kill off one of the major characters of the story. It feels more like a Deus Ex Machina excuse for keeping Paige alive, since the explanations for Jade's powers are hand-waved at best and aren't explored that much in this game. After Secundo gets his moment in the sun for saving the group, the finale is finally beginning. After everything, the civilians come to help you, and you get to the Great Crypt, and the ending is in sight. But not before the story cranks up to 11 with the reveal of what Jade truly is, which is a big mystery in the context of someone who's just played the game. If you did research and speculation, you might have an idea on what's going on, but I was never completely sure. Take everything I say here with a grain of salt. Jade is some kind of life force that the Doms depend on, if I'm correct on this, and the thing that is giving that life force is Shawnee. She was taken by the Doms some time ago, either by Jade's parents or Paige, though I have a hunch to believe that it was her parents, since Paige mentions that they were all having some problems with the authorities. I wouldn't be surprised if Paige was hiding how Jade's parents had some reason for not going off-world with them. Because she was able to leave the Doms' grasp, the Doms' power has begun to leave them. As a result, the Doms priest resorted to capturing humans so that he and his subjects could continue to live, but they were still on the lookout for Shawnee. During the final boss fight, the Doms priest summons a bunch of pages out to attack Jade and Double H. Now, it's not confirmed if they're clones or some kind of illusion, but what is known and seen is that they look and sound like Paige, and when they hit the ground, they will transform into a normal Dom sarcophagi. Soon enough, the Doms priest takes Double H away as well, and Jade is on her own for the rest of the fight. Later, the Doms priest summons multiple Double H's, but instead of just attacking and being enemies, they start speaking to Jade, telling her to give up, and that her efforts are useless here.
It's your fault that we're suffering, Miss Jade. Abandon. Join us, Miss Jade.
The enemies are saying the same things that Jade said to herself at the lighthouse after the children were abducted. They're attacking Jade's emotions where they're most weak. But Jade keeps going, until the game stops the fight and mentions that Jade is losing control of her soul. The screen goes fuzzy, and the controls are suddenly reversed. While this ends up being a frustrating encounter from a gameplay perspective, it's nearly perfect in storytelling. Jade is losing control of herself. Her environment and spirit aren't hers at the moment. She's having to keep control, and Shawnee is close to consuming Jade, if I'm correct on this. But as the player fights the Doms priest one last time, and as you progress through the final directional input section, the screen begins to become less fuzzy. Jade's beginning to gain control again. She's beginning to get a balance. This is where the discussion about Beyond Good and Evil's title comes into play. Michel Ancel believed firmly in saying that this game's title is representative of how humanity is always in a constant struggle between what is good and what is bad, and I think that the final boss and the last few scenes perfectly show what he means. Jade is now in control of herself, her soul, and Shawnee. She's resurrecting all the people in the Great Crypt who were sacrificed by the Dom's priest. Even Paige and Double H return safely. I interpret this final scene as Jade being able to see through all the good, evil, and everything between and beyond that. Jade is now a metaphor for what the game is about. Despite the lack of dialogue and cutscenes in an 8-hour game, it's the subtle messages and visuals that make Beyond Good and Evil's story so beautiful. Beyond Good and Evil is a wonderful game. While it wasn't completely perfect in any way, especially in its gameplay department all these years later, and even back when it first released, it rightfully left an impression on gamers and critics. But it's sad that Beyond couldn't get the recognition it deserved in its time. It's akin to Spec Ops: The Line, where everyone knows about it, yet they didn't repay the developers several times over, despite the fact that it rightfully deserves to. Similar to the works it was inspired by, it was a piece of art that is cherished in its own time and in the modern day. Beyond Good and Evil is frustrating, but it's also an experience, where despite its problems, it's still worth coming back and experiencing all these years later. Beyond's messages and story are much more relevant in the present day than ever before, and gaming's 6th generation witnessed a change, where fidelity was beginning to take over game development. Ubisoft did the same with Beyond Good and Evil, beginning to show how cinematic video games can truly be, even if it was in its infancy during this period. Michel Ancel said that he believed that Beyond Good and Evil would take time to grow on people, and the fact that Beyond is even getting a sequel after a decade and a half is proof of this statement. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, check out my other videos. I'm currently doing a playthrough of Mass Effect, and afterwards I plan to play through the entirety of XCOM 2, with you viewers as the soldiers. If you would like to hear me in more narration, you should subscribe for more content, or check out Comic Foil's character study series, who can make far better character analyses than I will ever do. Once again, thank you.